Again, thanks to those who are just joining us. Please put your names, pronouns, and if you're with an organization, please put that in the chat and take an opportunity to do the poll, which has just launched. You may have to scroll down to answer all the questions. Okay, wonderful. Well, it is now just after 7. So I would like to welcome everyone to this Budget Deputation Training webinar, which is hosted by Toronto Climate Action Network, or TCAN, and Climate Fast. My name is Anne Keary. I am co-chair this year of TCAN. I'm also a member of Climate Fast, and I'm a member of the group For Our Kids Toronto as well. TCAN is an umbrella organization which now includes actually over 60 different grassroots climate groups across Toronto, and we're growing. And Climate Fast is a TCAN member organization whose goal is to, quote, build and support a strong, informed civic movement that makes climate action and climate justice a top priority and motivates our elected officials to take decisive and urgent action. Climate Fast has a long history of supporting climate action in the City of Toronto through deputation trainings like this one and other actions. They have played a really important role in securing councillor support for the Transform TO Net Zero strategy. So we have a poll here. If you haven't had a chance to take the poll, please take a moment now to do it. We're interested to know about your experience with engaging with City Council. And just to note that you may have to use the slide bar to see all the questions. So while that's going on, a few words about our procedure tonight. The workshop is being transcribed in real time, but the transcription may be incorrect at times. So the transcription will not be available after the workshop. The workshop is being recorded in the main Zoom room, but not in the breakout rooms. And throughout the course of the workshop, the webinar, please put any questions that you have in the chat. And Colleen Lynch, who is a member of Climate Fast and also works with Environmental Defence. Colleen is monitoring the chat and she'll be helping us with the Q&A. So I know that more people are still entering the room, but I'm going to give a quick look at the poll results. How many of you have written a letter to the mayor or councillor? So right now we've got 42% have done so, 58% have not. Have you previously given a budget deputation, oral or written? 29% of us have, 71% of us haven't yet. Have you ever met with your councillor? And the answer there is that 36% of us have and 64% of us haven't. This is great to see. Thank you to all of you who have participated in democracy, and thank you to all of you who are interested to do so. This work of advocating for the city you want, advocating for our climate action plan to build a more just and sustainable and resilient Toronto is just so important, and it really does make a difference. As you know, we're in the middle of a climate crisis and an affordability crisis, and these are interconnected, and action on both fronts is so needed. So now a quick look at our, oh, I just realized I didn't share the results live of the poll, so I'm going to quickly do that. If you didn't see them, just to give yourselves a quick look at the results. So I will now close that. Okay, sorry, my computer is glitching a bit. I'm not sure if
I will share the results. Thank you.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry. I've still got the poll in front of my screen, so I'm not sure if it's in front of everyone else's screen at this point. So I'm going to move. Okay.
We have the results.
Okay. So first of all, we will have welcome and introductions that I have done. So welcome again to everyone who has joined us. I'm about to do a land acknowledgement. Then we will hear from Councillor Alejandra Bravo perspectives on this city budget. We will then hear from Sarah Buchanan from the Toronto Environmental Alliance, and she will be presenting their analysis of this budget from a climate perspective. We will then hear from Lynn Adamson from Climate Fast with information and tips on deputing. We'll move to discussion in breakout rooms and then a wrap up. So, oh, whoops, going back. But let's begin by acknowledging the lands upon which we live and work, which are the ancestral lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe Nations, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. As many of you will know, these lands were and are covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee Confederacies and other allied nations to peaceably share and care for the lands, waters, and all the living beings around the Great Lake. I would also like to acknowledge that with the invasion of European colonizers, the principles embedded in the Dish with One Spoon Covenant were broken. Settlers took the land through duplicity and force, displacing Indigenous peoples from their own land, harming and displacing other living beings, and disrupting entire ecosystems. And this, of course, is not just an issue in the past, it is ongoing. For those of us who are settlers, it is important to acknowledge these truths. And it is also important for us to stand in solidarity with Indigenous people, with Indigenous land defenders, and support the work of decolonisation. And this evening, I would like to acknowledge in particular the work of the Indigenous Land Stewardship Circle. This is a community of elders, knowledge keepers, and community members who share a commitment to healing Indigenous lands and caring for the oak savannas in what is now known as High Park. These were the lands upon which their ancestors conducted ceremony, grew gardens, hunted and foraged for food and medicines. And you can learn more about their work and how to support it on the resource document that will be shared after this event. And also just noting that when we advocate for a more equitable, resilient, and just and sustainable city, let's advocate for resources and services for Indigenous communities. And I will now stop sharing my slides and introduce our first speaker, which is Councillor Alejandra Bravo. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Councillor Bravo. She is a councillor for Ward 9 Davenport and chair of the Economic and Community Development Committee. Prior to being elected as City Councillor in 2022, Councillor Bravo's work focused on helping communities understand and influence government decisions and the government decisions that impact them. She has worked with numerous civil society organisations, including the Broadbent Institute, where she was Director of Leadership and Training, the Power Lab, the Maytree Foundation, and Art Starts. Councillor Bravo is a graduate of the University of Toronto and the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. Born in Chile, she moved to Canada with her family as a refugee when she was a child. In addition to English, she is fluent in Spanish, French, and Portuguese. So I can't think of anyone better qualified when it comes to engaging Toronto's diverse communities in building the just and sustainable city we want. Again, a reminder, please put any questions in the chat where Colleen will collect them, and we'll have the Q&A after Councillor Bravo's presentation. Over to you, Councillor.
Thank you so much, Anne, and what an amazing turnout. It's delightful to see how many people are here. And when you were talking about the democratic process, the meeting with the elected person is just such a small part of it. I think it really starts with this kind of deliberation, the convening of people with the shared interests, shared values, interested and willing to take action. However experienced you are, the first action is actually to coming into a space like this. So that's awesome. The budget is obviously a really important opportunity to take action on the things that you value, because a budget is really an expression of what you value. And I think we all know that how we got here where we are today was a lot of years in the making. more than a decade of artificially keeping property taxes low, um, more than a decade of lack of investment from federal and provincial governments, and also more than a decade of imagining really great things and pulling in civil society to create them. I think about Transform TO and what a visionary document it is, how the essential things about Transform TO, which I think are so transformational, include a vision that encompasses climate action along with efforts to make the economy more fair, involves everyone, pulls our resources, and really imagines some really tangible outcomes to get to net zero in a time frame. The problem with all of these years of budgets that haven't actually funded the things that we care about is that we're behind. I'd like to say we're going to get on track, but it feels to right now it's like we're not on the track yet. And in this budget, while it's not everything, it is a start and a recognition that we absolutely cannot do the things that we need to do together. We cannot fix the things that we need to fix. We cannot build the things that we need to build if we don't have the resources. I was at the budget meeting that I had in my community on Monday. I talked about how for 13 years we know that the roof has been leaking. It just got worse and worse. Now, not only do we not need a new roof, but we need to repair all the damage to the structure. And in a lot of ways, this is what underinvestment has meant. And of course, when it comes to climate action, climate adaptation, climate mitigation, it's really important that we have the programmatic dollars and also the capital dollars to deliver on what we need. So this is where we are. I think it's the first look, like realistic look at since 2010 at what we actually need with an opening pressure of $1.8 billion, which means a fiscal hole of $1.8 billion. That would have been the equivalent of a 42% property tax increase. A lot of measures have been taken to reduce that number to 10.5%, and it does rely on the federal government coming through with its obligations to refugees. But I think that it puts us on a trajectory. We need to get to a place where we're actually funding some of the more transformative programs that have been included in this budget. And I know you're going to hear more about what those elements are. It puts us in a trajectory where we can actually start to build the more resilient city in the future, and that we're doing our bit around during a climate emergency, which is so disproportionately impacts people depending on what means they have, what other pressures, economic pressures that they're facing, whether they're a renter, the not only the cold snaps and the changing weather, the pressure on the summer for renters, and it's just the flooding that we're mitigating through other means. It's such a bad value for money to not get ahead of that, and also it's dangerous and irresponsible. I also think that such a core piece of, as you all know, of contributions to emissions being transportation, we absolutely cannot afford to step back from funding TTC to 97% of operations pre-pandemic, because this is a fundamental piece of climate action, and it's actually such an important piece of economic and social justice. Affordability comes in so many different forms for people, and there's lots of ways to talk about it. There are residents in my ward I was meeting with last night who can no longer get insurance because of all the flooding that's occurred in their neighborhood. We think about the resources and the funds that are saved when through property taxes, we're ensuring that transit fares don't increase, and that we actually are able to get to a part-time job after going to school all day on time. And then, of course, the terrible compounding costs of events like heat waves and the impacts on the economy. I think what's at stake here is something that's so profound, which is actually just keeping the things that we have with some enhancements that our previous commitment. We're actually not, we're not adding so much as we are actually funding the commitments that have been made repeatedly over the years. I think it's also really dangerous and fuels the growth in a kind of dangerous ultra right-wing populism when we continue to make strategies like Transform TO, or we have different strategies, poverty strategy, youth strategy, without any investments or resources behind that. What we're telling people is that, yeah, we got this, we're taking care of it, but they see no measurable difference. You know, when people in my ward hear about the dedicated busways that were announced in a strategy, and I tell them, well, we're not intending to study it really until 2030. It really is a way that we set up people to lose faith in government and in democracy, and that can be truly dangerous at a time when we need to be creating social consensus around the things that matter. And if we look at, at before this current increase in inflation, people continually said that climate was top of mind. That has to continue to be true. And the only way that we can do that is to show material gains, show that things are actually changing. And that's through investment. I think that when we think about approaching this budget and the work that you're going to do with your advocacy, speaking in the most plain way about how what you value impacts so many people in different ways is really going to reach counselors and other decision makers who are following. And I can say that provincial governments and federal governments are also monitoring what's happening in Toronto and other municipalities, because what's being proposed and what's being done here is needed in other places. And that municipal action, municipal pressure can actually make change at other orders of government. The kind of conversations that we have here that you're going to have when you make a deputation is putting really important messages into the public realm that influence how every other debate takes place. That's why your public speech around the things that you care about is so crucial. It's really, really essential that we're contacting the counselors that are not so sure about the investments that are being proposed, that are concerned about telling people the truth, that we actually have to increase property taxes to fund the things that we said that we intended to do, and that's a form of accountability as well. If you adopted and you supported a strategy, then now you have the accountability and the obligation to put your money where your mouth is, and that does come potentially at a political cost, but we need to have the courage, and that's an essential part of leadership. So I would recommend to you that, if you could get out there, figure out which counselors are most nervous about supporting this budget, which counselors need to hear your courage inspire their courage, your insights inspire their connection of the dots. That will be truly transformational. And I think that we have a good chance of stopping the slide, stopping the backslide that's happened over the last decade, the time that we've lost, critical time that we've lost, and start to do things that are really envisaging action now. So I do want to leave time for questions and discussion. I just want to say that if we don't do this now, when we have a new mayor who's made this kind of commitment, and a group of counselors that are willing to risk a lot to materially change things in Toronto, to show through action and show through deed that it is possible when we pull our resources together to find solutions to the things that impact us the most, including the shelter crisis, affordability crisis that has to do the lack of affordable housing, and so much more. So I'll leave it at that for now. And I understand that there may be questions and discussion, and I'm very excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Bravo, for your words and your galvanizing encouragement to all here to speak out on what matters so much. I really appreciate it. I know that Colleen, I think, was monitoring the chat for any questions. Colleen, over to you to monitor the Q&A.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks, Councillor Bravo. I actually don't see any questions in the chat. I think you articulated what you said very well, and you've left no one confused. But I will welcome everybody who may have a question that you haven't yet articulated, either in the chat, or if you feel more comfortable and cannot use the chat, you could put your hand up and we will try to field a question that way. But it is best to use the chat if you can. And I see a brilliant and lucid summary. Compliment to you.
That's really nice. I also say, Colleen, that sometimes the questions come to you later. And I think that when you discuss maybe when you do the training and you discuss strategy, there might be other questions. So I want to make the offer that in our office, we'd be very happy to, if you pull those questions to provide the answers. There might be more information that you need to get, some insights in terms of how you approach different counselors. I also would be very willing to do that. I just really want to thank you for, number one, for convening this. It's so important that civil society groups are with this important shared interest. It really cuts across every division at the city, whether it's parks or roads or transit or housing. There's so many opportunities for action. I see there's a question here. What kinds of things are you hearing from your constituents about the budget so far? What's your read on where the public is at right now? There are some people that are phoning and they're angry because they are, we have a lot of people who are on fixed incomes, retired, sort of income poor but house rich. And that's something that, we'll be responding to. I've had 2 budget meetings so far, one in November to sort of look at what was coming. And at that time, we knew it was going to be like more than $1.5 billion, the sort of the hole that we're in. So we asked people, what do you value? What are your priorities? What do you want to see investment in? What would you, if you had to see cuts, where would you want cuts? And it was pretty unanimous and consistent across what we've seen in other community consultations, which is people were really worried about affordable housing and seeing the numbers of people that are living unhoused right now and the risks that they're facing, the dangers and just the human cost and also other forms of cost. And there was, climate always comes up in a lot of different ways depending on where you are, which has to do with like people concerned around transit, being able to access it, making sure it's reliable. A lot of concern that we, in the last administration, cuts were made to transit, to bus service, which is really a lifeline, and wanting to see that restored. And also in our budget meetings where people have said anything should be cut, they said the police budget, where people thought that cuts could be made. So I think that's kind of the same thing that we heard at our meeting on Monday, in which we already knew what the budget rate would be. There was one person who was sort of irate and saying that it's just too much because in terms of a one-time. But I wasn't there to kind of say, I did say what I thought, but it was other people who said, well, the responsible thing here was to have years where we had 0% increase, 1% increase, 2% increase, when we knew that inflation was much higher and the population is growing. So I think in general, one person said, my bus isn't going to go up. My kids are going to get into summer camp. I know people are going to get shelter. $25 a month is a good deal. That was kind of the summary. Yeah.
That's interesting. So we do have a string of questions. So the next one here is, it's interesting. Do you think it's more important to emphasize the value of environmental investments rather than downplaying the cost of raised property taxes?
I think that they're kind of intimately connected, but leading with what you want to see, why you think it's so crucial to do something is the way to lead, and that represents real value to you. And if you can figure out kind of the cost of that, and you can make an equivalency saying, for example, I'm going to save, my property tax will increase by $27, but I calculate that I'm going to save much more on if by transit fares being frozen, or you can calculate what extreme weather events have meant, the opportunities that are being lost around certain, if there's particular programs that you think are really important. I think you're going to hear more about those. There, for a counselor that's worried about how it looks that we're increasing property taxes, they may be more motivated by value for money. And the thing is, that's what's great is that value for money is on our side, because we know that when we take, if it's the same thing as sort of individual actions to help for environmental causes are important, but systemic structural changes are what's actually going to deliver is going to save us in the long run. And it's going, and what if you can be very specific on for your life about what you think, how critical it is for yourself, for your family, and the people that you care for. And if you could connect it to some of the people in their own constituency, that really matters.
Yeah. Thank you. Here's an interesting one, and you may or may not have the answer, but how can we find the city councillors most in need of hearing our support?
I think that some groups like Toronto Environmental Alliance do track voting records, and I think, for example, the councillors that supported the commercial parking levy, which was a big success for sort of a dedicated tax for something that actually it does invest in climate action, that gives you some clues. I would say that the councillors that are most vulnerable to pressure are more in suburban areas. There are some councillors that have, for example, councillors that have an A+ sort of on report cards in the past on climate, probably, but are unsure about the increase. There may be one or two there. Make that connection. So I think it's really important to, and even if you do have, if you have your own counselor and it's not an effort to, it's also good for the people that are supportive to once in a while hear a good word. If you can take a moment to email your counselor saying, I hear you're supporting, thanks for doing that. It helps us to be able to say, we're hearing from our constituents. But in terms of organizing a meeting, making a phone call, writing a letter, writing a kind of, I would say that for making a deputation and identifying yourself, I'm in Scarborough, I'm in Etobicoke, I'm in North York, that really is important. And and then in terms of a hierarchy of impact, phone calls are very effective because it's like, wow, somebody made a phone call. An email that is actually like not a form email is very effective. And with your address, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That was actually really helpful. We'll do as many more as we can. Thank you everyone for being so eager to ask questions at this point. If we do not get to them all, that was very generous of you, Councillor Bravo, to suggest you might follow up afterwards as well. So we'll move along to the next one. Are there enough votes in council to pass the budget as it has been presented at this point?
I'm not sure. I think we have a new mayor, and certainly I would say, I supported her when she ran, and I've supported this agenda. I think each time this is such a crucial vote because it is the budget. We can't take anything for granted. So I think we have to work on the assumption that it's going to take work to actually win.
Thank you. So the mayor's telephone town hall polls are highlighting environment and climate as a choice to cut, but not a choice to increase. Why do you think that is happening?
I think that it's really, it's not something that everyone understands the same in terms of what is environmental. And it's one of the challenges of this work, which is it cuts across so many areas. So I think people are very motivated by things that they understand impact their daily lives, including like the garbage gets picked up. I turn on the tap, there's water. And so I think that it doesn't mean that there's a lack of commitment. I think it means that these are very popular education approaches, popular participation. It's wonderful because 18,000 people turned out, but it means that the conversation has to happen on a level which is accessible to everyone.
Yes. Okay, so there's a follow-up to that question, and it's how do you think we can best counter the attitudes of not valuing climate investments, climate expenditures?
I think that's a longer term piece of work that's probably not going to happen through the budget process. When you want to win a vote, it's not so much it's like you're sort of testing the power that you have to build your power to make change. It's the time in between votes. So I would say that I think that's a long-term project. And one of the challenges that I've been talking about is that there's a lot of we need to find the balance with hope. For some people, it's sort of like, it's too late. We're just going to go down in a blaze of glory. And that's, I think, a good topic for another day.
Yes, it's a big topic. So there is one more question here that I think you already partly answered. Would you see a phone call or a formal letter as more impactful, or a written letter signed by many?
I think that if you are able to get like a letter signed by many, I would say get organizations to sign it, neighborhood groups, the place-based groups. That's a really good effort. But in terms of an individualized letter, it's like an individual constituent. If someone says to you, I live in your ward, I'm a voter in your ward, and I live at this address, that makes a really big difference.
Thank you. I think I'm getting the signal from Anne that we're out of time for questions and answers, but that was really great. Your answers were all really helpful. And if we do get more questions, we'll follow up.
Thank you so much, and good luck for the rest of the workshop. It's been a real privilege to be here. And again, I want to thank you for what you're doing. It's going to make such a huge difference. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Bravo. Thanks for joining us. Well, that was great. I'm hoping everyone is feeling galvanized now to get out there and speak up for climate action and for climate justice in Toronto. We really very clearly got the message that this does absolutely make a difference. So I would now like to turn to our next speaker, Sarah Buchanan, who is the Campaigns Director at Toronto Environmental Alliance. From your website, from the T website, Sarah's career has spanned jobs in media, politics, and climate change advocacy. Most recently, she was, before T, working at Environmental Defence to push for stronger provincial action on climate change and empower communities to stop Highway 413. Before this, she worked for a city councillor in Toronto, focusing on childcare policy, water, transportation, and housing issues. Sarah cares deeply about bringing together social and environmental issues through progressive activism and connecting communities with the tools they need to build a better city for all. So thank you, Sarah, and over to you for your presentation.
Thanks, Anne. Hey, everyone. Sorry, my camera's really blurry tonight. I look like I'm kind of in a dream. It's because my basement is super, super messy right now, so I don't want anybody to see that. Hence the blur. I'm going to start sharing my screen here so that you can see I have a few slides to present here. Actually, before I do that, I first want to give a huge thank you to everyone who came out tonight who has never been to a budget meeting or deputed or even contacted their city representatives. I think, as Councillor Bravo mentioned, this is such a great community to start in, and there's so many awesome supportive people who maybe have done those things, who are probably super willing and happy to answer your questions even outside of this meeting. So I just want to encourage everyone, if you're planning to speak up and you're feeling nervous, you could probably contact literally anyone on this meeting who's done it before, including myself, had to ask for advice and receive it. So thanks so much, TCAN and Climate Fast, for organizing this and putting it together to help, particularly help folks who haven't done it before, because I know it can be daunting sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to share some slides here, and hopefully you'll be able to see them. Okay. Did everyone see that? Oh, now you're getting a sneak preview of everything. Okay, so I'm I'm Sarah Buchanan. I'm the campaigns director at Toronto Environmental Alliance, and T has been around for about 30 years. And we work for a greener, more equitable city in Toronto. That means we've been through a lot of city budgets over the years, and analyzed all manner of things from trees to investment in fossil fuels and vehicles and things like that. So what I'm going to present here tonight is a really kind of quick overview, and then happy to take some questions and discussion as well. So one of the big things that that we at T look at in the budget is how well the budget each year funds the city's Transform TO net zero strategy. You may be familiar with its previous name of just Transform TO. That's totally fine. There's some, as Councillor Bravo mentioned, there's some great things in that strategy, and we tend to look at how the numbers stack up in investing in some of the things that are on this list. Councillors and mayors have a tendency to commit to these really big, exciting plans, which Transform TO is. But then when it comes time to put money behind them at budget time, often, whoops, I don't know where the money is for this. We're just going to have to dial this back. There's a lot of that going on. So part of our job at T is to dig through the details and find out whether they're putting their money where their mouth is, and then to help folks speak up about where that money should go. Some of the really awesome things I'll just quickly talk about in here that make this a somewhat transformational plan is that it calls for all buildings, all existing buildings, the one that you're sitting in right now, I hope, to be net zero emissions by 2040. For 70% of trips to be on foot, bike, or transit. I think that's actually by 2030. And for this one, not a lot of folks know is in the modeling for Transform TO, free transit and really good, reliable transit for all. It has to be so good that it pulls people right out of their cars and into an amazing, punctual, affordable, accessible transit system. It also calls for electrifying a lot of things, including cars, transit, heating. It calls for a lot more renewable energy and more trees as well. That's just a few highlights of some of the things it calls for. And there's a lot of things that we analyze that aren't in Transform TO. So climate action really is so much more than just the environment and climate division budget. As Councillor Bravo mentioned, one of the biggest investments the city makes in climate action is actually in transit, into the TTC. So while T's not the expert on the TTC budget, we work with a lot of folks who are, like TTC riders and others, to look at, how much progress are they making towards that goal of making transit a world-class, amazing system that gets people out of their cars by 2040. And then there's places like the Parks, Forestry, and Recreation budget, even paramedic services. I think last year had a building that was getting some energy retrofits. That's climate action. So there's a lot scattered throughout the city and throughout the budget. And this brings a lot of opportunities for crossover. And so Venn diagrams are some of my favorite things in the world. You can see here how climate action kind of intersects with a lot of areas that are actually pretty immediately impactful in people's lives, which climate change also is. And so if you look at, for example, delivering affordable housing, which is a really huge priority right now for the city, as it should be, there's a lot of crossover with programs like MURA, like Housing TO, all the sort of TO named programs that want to build and provide more affordable housing. There are huge opportunities there to deliver green, low carbon housing along with that affordability to help retrofit buildings there. And that's some of the alignment that we look for and what we push for. And then talking about transit, things like providing the fare pass, which helps folks who might not otherwise be able to afford a transit pass to do so, or things like Rapid TO, which puts bus lanes on our streets so people on buses can get places faster. Those things have a lot of alignment with climate action, because when we make transit better, it gets more people to shift from their cars as well. And so a really top line budget takeaway for this year, to be honest, I'll just like step back for a second and say, on January 10th, when that city budget came out, I'm probably one of the only people in Toronto who gets excited about budget launch day, but I was also nervous. I knew the city had this $1.8 billion hole, essentially, which is like almost so large that you can't imagine it. But when it did come out, I breathed a bit of a sigh of relief that there weren't, big cuts to the environment and climate budget, or to the TTC, or to some of those critical core programs that we need to contribute to climate action. And in fact, there was some areas got a little bit more funding than we saw last year. Like in transit, we didn't see fares go up. We didn't see service go down. We, in fact, saw the fares frozen. We saw service, start to improve slightly. And we also saw some investment in some what I call game-changing programs in the environment and climate budget that will reduce emissions in the future. But the really big hurdle here is that this is a proposed budget, and there's a lot of sticker shock on that property tax increase amount, and council still has to vote on it. So that property tax revenue is desperately needed to fix a lot of the crumbling city that we've been hearing about for years. That money is needed for investing in transit. That money is needed for investing in climate action, and to keep core programs and services running. So to ensure that that sticks, and to make sure that there is the money in city coffers to do the things that the city has committed to do, and we essentially, we really need your voice. We need folks to speak up here. And we especially need you to speak up if you've never done so before, because those are the voices that can actually have the most impact, is, people who are so motivated by the situation that they reach out and they speak up. And so to prevent funding cuts and losing that investment in some of these core things that we did see that made me so relieved, we really need folks to speak up. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that are actually in the budget, the environment and climate budget, and elsewhere that are good. One, I've talked a lot about investing in public transit there. That's also going to help make life more affordable for people. I did a quick back of the napkin calculation for my own budget, and not raising TTC fares is going to save me about 1/4 of the total amount more I'm going to pay in property taxes. Not bringing library fines back in, it would be embarrassing for me to tell you how much I would probably pay in library fines. That's probably going to save me another 1/4. So when you think about making life more affordable through the investments from property taxes, it starts to sound a little different. There's also more money for staff for some really important climate programs. And one of my favorites that I like to talk about is the emissions performance standards program. It's not written down on here because it's really boring sounding, but it's a super, super critical program to gradually reduce emissions from existing buildings. It's one of the hardest places to actually reduce emissions in Toronto. This program, it hasn't even been formally approved yet. It's just starting to get off the ground, but they need staff to get it moving forward and to do all the thinking and planning that needs to be done. This program is in the future hopefully going to be one of the biggest tools to actually bend that curve down to where it needs to go. And so if that gets delayed, then we're looking at that curve bending a lot more slowly. There's also money in the budget to do some cool building decarbonization. Exhibition Place, that was a fun kind of little surprise in there that I wasn't expecting. It's getting some funding to reduce emissions by using wastewater energy, which I think could be a really exciting model for some other city buildings to also transition. And there's also some increased investments in bike lanes and the cycling network plan. Although, in talking with our friends at Cycle Toronto, we know that there's still a lot more to do there to hit some of those commitments to, getting lots of folks on bikes. So it's not 100% there yet, but it's getting a lot closer. So what is not in the budget? What do we want to see? I tried to limit myself on this one because we usually have a long laundry list of asks every year. And for this presentation, I just kept it to 2. Honestly, one of the biggest things we need is more funding from other levels of government. The city has really limited powers of taxation, and those powers of taxation don't grow with the economy. So we don't have access to income taxes or sales taxes. Those are the kinds of things that, as inflation grows, those grow generally, not always. In correspondence. Property taxes don't really do that. So it puts the city in a really tough position. And the federal and provincial government need to step up. We have similar climate goals, and although some are more ambitious than others, but greenhouse gas emissions don't just get reduced, because the city reduces them. It's a team effort, and the federal and provincial government really do need to fund some of these ambitious actions in the city plan. The city cannot do this alone. We just launched an action at T to ask your MP to step up and provide some funding for things like transit, green affordable housing, lots of good stuff. So there's a link there. I'll also put it in the chat after because I don't know if it works on this thing. And then another thing we'd like to see, we're supporting TTC riders and asking for Scarborough Busway to replace the RT, which conked out in August. And the funding has been promised for that, and it is not in the budget. So we'd really like to see that put back in. And so what's under threat here? This is sort of an honesty moment here. The proposed climate budget funding, as exciting as it is slightly under threat, just as kind of everything is right now because it's not approved yet. And councillors still need to vote on that property tax increase, and many, are vulnerable to public outcry in one direction or another. That's why we need you to help be part of the public outcry to say, we need investment in our city programs and services. And, climate and environment budgets are vulnerable. So we heard Councillor Bravo, I think, mention it as well. Climate can be polarizing. There was a lot of support in the pre-budget consultations for investment in environment and climate. We also saw almost the same amount of people saying, no, we want to remove funding from it. So it can be a really polarizing issue. Frankly, a lot of people don't always understand the impact on their own lives that, removing this funding would have. So, I've also put a tweet in here from last night talking about the poll results from a telephone town hall, where environment and climate change actually came out on top in a sample of like 18,000 people. In things that people would want to cut. So, it just means we have to be extra mindful to get all of our friends and neighbors out there talking about how important this is. And there's one more telephone town hall tomorrow night. So if you can get out there and push those buttons and support environment and climate in those polls, that would be really, really helpful. So that's why we need you to speak up. We need you to tell your councillor that you support investing in these critical programs and services. There's a few ideas here for how you can reach out to them. I said send them a personalized email or phone call right at the top, because that really does make a difference. If you are their constituent, you start off saying, hey, I live, at this address in your ward and I'm a voter. Here's why I care about, environment or climate or whatever it is you're writing about. Tell your story, mention why you support it, and ask them to invest in their city. A phone call is also great. You can leave a voicemail or a message. It makes a strong impact. I used to work for a city councilor, and if we got 5 or 6 phone calls on something, that was enough to bring it into a team meeting. I mentioned joining a telephone town hall. There's also speaking up at a budget committee meeting. I know Lynn's going to be talking to you all about that more tonight. It's a great way to, see the process in action and have your say, and telling your friends and neighbors to do the same. And there's also a link here, which goes to the city page on all their various different consultations and places where you can speak up. But, if you feel daunted by the idea of, formally speaking at budget committee, sending a personalized email is also a really, really great thing to do. Ideally, do both. And I'm not going to go through this cheat sheet, but I'll just say that we do have a cheat sheet available. I think it's in the resources that are going to be sent out. So you could, if you wanted to, have it up on your phone or print it out and have it with you. It fits on a page with just some basics, ideas for things you can say that relate to the climate budget here. And this is for the nerds. There's a cool new briefing note in this year's budget materials that was really hard to find. I actually didn't know it existed. It's called the Carbon Budget Baseline briefing note, and it has some cool stuff on like how much is the city spending on fossil fuels this year? How far behind are we on our climate goals? It turns out we're kind of far behind. We're tracking more towards a business as planned scenario than the net zero by 2040 scenario. It talks about maybe why this is, but what kind of programs might help bend that curve back down. Like my favorite program, the emissions performance standards for buildings. And then I'll give a quick plug here for our action again to email your MP and tell them to step up. MPs in Toronto, I know they're hearing a lot about it right now, but they need to hear from their constituents who will say, you live in this city too. We need you to share the wealth. The federal government has a lot of access to revenue tools that we don't, and you need to fund your crumbling city. So there you go. There's a tool right there you can use. I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'm going to hand it to Colleen, who's been monitoring the chat. Over you, Colleen. We only have a few minutes because I know Lynn also wants to present on the how to depute. And so I'll hand it to Colleen.
Okay, great. We do have a few questions, Sarah. And you already covered this, but maybe you can do a quick synopsis. What are the demands for the 2024 budget by Toronto Climate Action Network, Climate Fast, and T? So you mentioned a few, maybe you could just recap.
Yeah. So the two demands that I mentioned up top, one was actually federal funding, and so we launched that action. We've got that action going, and I will plunk a link in the chat there. And then the other demand was the Scarborough busway. So a lot of folks waiting out in the cold for crowded buses, out in Scarborough. And when the RT shut down, it was replaced with buses. But what we want to see, and they actually did, I think, promise at one point to do, was to create a bus corridor that would move people a lot faster and get those cars out of the way. So we want to see the funding for that put in. We have a couple of other asks, but I know our time is really short, so I'll hold.
Sure. Yes, and those resources with more details about all the asks will be sent afterwards by email as well. So there's one transit related question that I'm not sure you can actually ask, but can we try to improve the accuracy of transit apps like Transit? I'm not sure, but yeah.
Sure. I would love that. In fact, if anyone has a recommendation for a more accurate transit app, please put it in the chat because I would love to see it. I try to catch that 127 Davenport all the time, and I just feel like I'm, anyway, yeah.
Yes, help us out. Put answers in the chat if you have them. And so there's one more question, Sarah, and it's about the condo and rental towers being built in Toronto right now. And a lot of them are not following the net zero path. So they'll become expensive retrofits in the future. And so how can we get builders to adopt net zero?
I'm so glad you asked me this question because it gives me an opportunity to talk about my favorite program, the Emissions Performance Standards program. So in all seriousness, there's a lot of buildings being built right now that aren't, that aren't net zero and won't be. They'll be standing in 2040 when they're supposed to be net zero. What's going on? So the city has a couple of tools One of them is they are going to be bringing in performance standards for buildings that'll say gradually over the years, you need to be this much more efficient and you need to, create this much less fewer greenhouse gas emissions every year. So that's going to be a motivator because they will get fined if they don't follow those efficiency guidelines. This is a really big tool. They've been a bit hesitant to do that. Hopefully, it is going to be coupled with some grant programs and loan programs as well. And they're kind of working out all those details now. I'll also say the Toronto Green Standard is a really great tool that encourages new buildings to develop more and more ambitious low carbon building techniques over time. So those are going to get stricter and stricter and stricter.
Wow,
And
that sounds really good.
Supporting this budget does support those things. I'll just put in a plug there.
Cool. Yes. So that's good. There's one more I want to get in here. I know we're kind of time pressured, but I think this is a good one. Should we use our deputation time to discuss provincial and federal funding, or just use the T tool? Yeah.
That's such a good question. Yeah. So I would lean towards the latter, towards using the T tool, maybe putting a brief mention in your deputation, because sometimes what happens is you speak, you depute, and then a counselor will say, well, do you know that we can't possibly fund this all on our own? Have you talked to your MP about federal funding? And if you want to head that off, you can just mention quickly that hey, I know the city, needs access to more funding tools for climate. I've asked my MP to step up. I'm also telling you, I want you to support, investment in the city's budget. The city needs to step up too.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say use more of your time to talk about, the kind of things that are within the city's jurisdiction that that you want to see and that you support.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's very helpful. And I do think we're a little bit over time. And do we have time for more, or should we?
We should probably move to Lynn now. But thank you, Sarah. That was a great
thank you so much.
Really. Okay, so it is now my pleasure to introduce Lynn Adamson. Lynn is going to be giving us tips and information on how to depute. I'll introduce Lynn in case you don't know who Lynn is. Many of us in the climate space owe a lot to Lynn and all of her work. So Lynn is co-chair of Climate Fast. She is also co-chair of the city's climate advisory group. And she, in addition, sits on the TCAN steering committee. She's a very experienced deputant and has helped so many others put their deputations together. So over to you, Lynn. And a question before I do that, Lynn, would you like me to share the slides, or would you like to share your slides?
Why don't you go ahead and share, Anne, just to avoid any technical problems from my end.
Okay, I'll do that. Happy to do that. Okay, so just a minute and I will get that set up.
Oh, there are blue lights from my glasses. I apologize. Oh, maybe if I sit like that, I'm okay. Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about deputations. What are they? They're short 3 to 5 minute speeches that we get the opportunity to make to city council committees. And that can be infrastructure and environment committee, other committees, and in this case, it's the budget committee. It's really a privilege and a right, and a very important right that we have as residents of Toronto to be able to address our councillors in person and have them hear us. It's really important, and they do take from it a sense of what it is that really matters to citizens, because they know you're taking your own volunteer time to show up and speak. So it has an impact. And there are special budget consultations that are held in several locations throughout the city, and those will be Monday and Tuesday next week. You need to register to speak at one of them by Friday at 4:30. And there's other locations now. City Hall, I believe, is full morning and afternoon on Monday, but the evening had some spaces left last I checked. And the Scarborough Civic Center has spaces as well on Monday, and you can see it. There's room in Etobicoke in the afternoon and evening on Tuesday, and North York Civic Center. You should know that you can speak virtually to any of those locations. So you can, when you register, just say whether you want to come in person, which is really great if you can, because you meet the other deputants and you meet the councillors in person. We sometimes even get a photo at the end of the session with the councillors and the deputants. It's a really good opportunity, but you know what? We're all busy. And if you want to do it from home, that's good too. And just you won't know for sure where you are on the list. The sooner you sign up, the earlier you will be on the list. And you will be able to look on the day of the hearings about an hour before the session. They'll put out a list, so you'll see where you are in the order. And you just want to follow the instructions from the clerk if you're coming in from home on your computer or the telephone. They are very helpful. The staff are very helpful. So any questions you have, you can let them know. You should be able to use slides if you want to show images, pictures, or illustrate your points, or you can just speak and you don't need to use the full 5 minutes. In fact, you may have to give just 3 minutes if they're very busy, but I don't think that's going to happen this time, especially in the remote locations. They rarely fill up their full time. They set a lot of time aside to hear from us, so it's a really great opportunity to do that. Yes, you want to email what your written comments as well, and you want to indicate whether you want them public or not. And it's really good for group submissions to be public, and you may want your personal one to be public as well. What that means is they set up a link, and the minutes of their budget committee session will allow people to link to your letter. Otherwise, it just has your name and submission. But you will be recorded on a YouTube, and you will be able to look at that yourself and send it to your friends after the event. So it is, when you speak in person, it is quite public and a good opportunity. And it's way better than a letter. But the number of letters that come in also do show public interest. So if you can't do a presentation in person, then do consider writing a letter. Okay. So on the document, there is a document link that's going to give you more information about deputations, and it will include links to the background documents. Some of you asked about the asks, and you'll be able to see more about what we need and what we're getting if you can take the time to follow some of those links. And we'll hopefully send out a little more information to you as well. So let me see. Let's go on again to the next one. Yes, here we go. Introduce yourself. Start by stating your name, your ward. You can say what you do for a living if you like, and thank the committee for the opportunity to speak. You want to make your submission personal. You can highlight the urgent need globally, but you don't want to only talk about that. You want to link to climate change impacts that you feel in your community that you're concerned about for Toronto. Okay, next slide, please. And you want to pick your key points. So you will want to make a broad statement about the importance of implementing Transform TO net zero strategy and any particular asks, which Sarah has given us a couple of those. Now, we do need the budget increase in order to fund. It has expanded staffing for our program that we really need. So we do not want to see any cuts to the city's budget. And let me see, you want to use numbers sparingly in your talk. You want to be personal. It's your opportunity to relate to the councillors that are there as a human being living in the city that we all share that's concerned. Whether it's like Alejandra said, people can't get insurance because of flooding in some places in the city. So there may be direct impacts you want to talk about, or you may be wanting to highlight that there's lots of opportunities for jobs, for young people, for minorities, for people to get engaged in retrofits, so that you're excited about the potential for that, and it's really important. or that transit really matters to you, or that bike lanes really matter to you. Let them know what it is in that Transform TO program that really matters to you. Okay, so be respectful. Yes. Yes, give the vision of the city you want and be respectful. You set the tone. Please be kind in your comments and straightforward. And you don't have to mince words, but you don't want to insult anyone or criticize anyone. There's no need to do that in order to make your point. So be respectful and as clear as you can be. Okay, next one, please. I think there's one more. Oops. Nope, go back one. We missed one. Yes, so you want to restate at the end what you're looking for and be prepared for questions. You may get questions. They're probably friendly questions that they just want you to say a little bit more about what you put in, but occasionally somebody might put you on the spot and you can just say, I don't know, or I'll try and find out. Or as Sarah said, you can say, yes, I know other levels of government have to come in, but let's do our part at the city. So you just find an answer. And let me see, next one. Okay, we've got a brief, I think it's just about a minute of a deputation, so you can see what it looks like. And again, you can do it online, so you don't need to be in person, but this is an in-person clip. Can we hear it?
Founder
Oh,
of
there
a
we go.
grassroots organization called Scarborough Environmental Association. I'm here to ask you today to not go through with the service cuts, because at a time when we need more people to take transit, we want to reach our environmental goals, service cuts will chase people away and increasing fares will chase people away. We all agree that we're in a climate emergency, like the city voted on it, but any sort of disruption to service, making people wait 30 minutes, that means they're going to find alternatives. And I've seen a lot of people do that over the years during COVID. And that's why we see that there's still like a 20% gap between what it was pre-pandemic.
Thank you. And I just want to say one more thing, and that is that you need to practice your deputation. Read it aloud to yourself and time yourself. Don't, give yourself more than 4 minutes in your practice, and do identify how you could cut it to 3 minutes if you need to. Because it's nice for you to be able to give your complete comments. And email your deputation in advance, the budget committee. You want to share it with your own councillor, combine it with phoning or emailing them to let them know you want this budget increase to go through. And you may even want to meet with your councillor. So consider doing that. It could be on the phone or in person, but to make sure that they do hear you, how important this is. This is a crucially important budget, and it's crucially important for the climate and for quality of life in our city. It's a catch-up budget. We have been not raising enough money at all, so that we have a very big backlog of expenses in the city, and we're not going to get it all covered by this budget, but we're going to make a really good step forward by this increase. Okay, that's it. If there's any questions, let me know, but that's my presentation for now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lynn, for all of your valuable advice. Given the time, we're actually not going to take questions right now, and we're going to move to our breakout rooms, and the facilitators in the breakout rooms have all had experience with deputing. So I will now turn it over to the tech team to send us into the different breakout rooms. So we'll have 20 minutes there, and then we'll come back to the main room. There'll be no need to record. We won't be doing, for a recorder, for someone to take notes, because we don't have time at this point to do a go around at the end. But this is a valuable time to share. So thank you, tech team. Everybody, I'm not sure if we're still getting people back from the breakout rooms. It looks like a number of people may have already left. So I'm going to quickly share our last screen with a thank you to everybody. Just a sec. Okay, and slideshow, and final slide. There we go. So I guess we've lost a few people because we are out of time, but I just wanted to give a huge thank you to those who came, those who participated in the breakout rooms, and just to thank everyone for coming. I'm really excited to meet new people who are new to deputing and doing this for the first time. One piece we didn't get to talk about were the budget town halls that are coming up as well, which is another really important opportunity for people to speak up for climate action in the city. All of this information will be shared on the resource doc that we will be sending out after this event. Thanks to the tech team, thanks to all the facilitators, and thanks to the presenters, and please stay in touch. Will be links to newsletter signups if you're not already on one of our newsletters. So thank you all, and good night from all of us.